So hello and welcome to Dommy Tries This. I hope you brought your cuppa. Today's coffee mug is one of my favorites and I just kind of needed to see that little M&M face today. Today's tea is our second tea from our January Sips By box. It is the Buddha Tea's Calm Buddha Blend. This is one of the ones that does not have any of the ingredients on the packet or on the little carton that it came in. So going in blind, folks, going in blind. Let's give it a taste and see how we like it. Okay, slightly oversugared it, I can tell you that. There's a slight mint flavor to it. It's a very delicate mint. It's good tea. And that's all I'm getting from it right now. I'll have to look it up and see what the ingredients are, I think. It's a good tea. This poor tea has been through it. It's already been a day. It's already been a day. I actually been resisting taking a sip of that for a little while now because it's been a day. And I actually had to reheat it in my microwave at one point because, like I said, it's already been a day. Anyway, so today is our Whole and Healthy Wednesday, and we are going to start talking about food. And my first warning is I'm going to say some things that a lot of people aren't going to like. But some of those things that I'm going to say over the course of however long we talk about food is I go by research and science, and I do a lot of, I'm not saying I'm an expert because, 30 minutes of Googling an expert does not make you. But I do try to go to legitimate sites and not fad diet sites or anything like that. So I do try to get my information from legitimate science-based sites and sources. Some of them are on Facebook, and a lot of them have done more research and are involved in the actual industry. And so that's what I base everything on. Sorry about that. I had to let my son come in and do his thing. But anyway, so if what I have to say upsets you, I'm sorry. But like I said, I do try to base it on science-based studies, and I may be a little bit behind the times, but I don't think I'm that far behind, and the people that I follow and the research I look up is not that far behind on the times either. So, and unfortunately, I know, but there are going to be people that are going to say, but this works for me. Well, that's cool, and we are all individuals, and there are going to be individual things that work for one person and not the next, but that's an anecdote, and an anecdote doesn't necessarily disprove the science. So just want to get that out of the way before people start getting pissed off. Today shouldn't be too bad. Today should be mostly about my journey with food, because that's where we've been starting everything else. We started with the whole weight journey with my journey, and then we started with the whole exercise thing with what I've done, and we're going to do the same thing with food. But before we get into all of that, I got to show you our new and old for today. So in terms of makeup, our new will include the Protégé Suva that I won, and it's already looking a bit of a wreck, but it's got some really pretty colors in there. So we're going to work with that a little bit today. Also in the new category is, if you've watched my BoxyCharm, you know I got the Tarte Rainforest of the Sea Volume 3, and that it is a very, very neutral palette. So we'll try to see if we can throw some of that in. I really would have preferred one or two. One of them has a beautiful, really dark brown that would have provided some nice depth, and the other one had some purples in it. So, but hey, we've got this one, and I've used it once already. It's Tarte. Their quality is good, even if their other issues are not. And then for our old, I'm going to be using my favorite Violet Voss Pro hashtag palette. This one has my beautiful golds and purples, and the one little black that Violet Voss seems to want to include in everything. But it is my favorite palette. I love the colors in here, and hopefully you will see why when I use it. Trying not to let things be too bright because we've had some issues with color. Hopefully that's there. Okay. Also, new and old, I was going to test a new foundation, but I think I'm going to wait for my live Facebook on Sunday afternoon, because after this I'm going to be filming my Ipsy bag unopening. So we're going to stick with our CoverGirl mix. That's our old. And we're going to be using a lot of Ipsy stuff that I've been using for the last month, relatively new, and that would be the cake and the Balm Bronzer and the Finding Fernandad Blush and the Sugar Brow thing. So those will get used today. And I have one thing that's kind of new, kind of old. I used to use it a while back, and then I got my Mineralogy, and I got the Mineralogy because the peach in it is actually closer to the color of peach that I was looking for. However, I'm going to be using, this is a brand new tube of the NYX HD color corrector in green. I'm going to use that for my red spots, and yeah, so kind of new and old mix because I've used it before. So that's our stuff that we're getting started with. I've already primed my face. I've already put on my glasses. I'm taking off my glasses. I've already put on my primer and my stuff, and I'm already feeling some issues up here, unfortunately. So it's going to be interesting to see if this sticks at all. The other thing that I've done to make this a little easier so I can stop trying to hunt down the brushes I like is I've put the ones that I love in their own little glass jar. So hopefully now I won't be hunting them down the way I have been in the past. So let's talk about food, and let's talk about with where I started. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to mix Era in there with this matte Tiki and see what we get. Grabbing my favorite Juvia's Place brush. So when I actually started working on my food we've been out here for about 15 years, I think. We're in Georgia, and I started in California. So I want to say 16 or 17 years ago is when we actually started working on food. And prior to that, let's go back a little further than that. Okay, so these two are not playing nice for some reason. Come on. When I was a kid, I've been a young kid, my mother was one of those people who did homemade granola for a while. I mean, and, you know, just stuff like that. She did a lot of homemade stuff, healthy stuff. Back then, healthy didn't necessarily taste so good. So it actually was not anything that I was overly impressed with in terms of flavor. And I think that kind of influenced how I felt about it later in life. And after she divorced and moved us out to California, however, things kind of went south for a lot of stuff, including the food. It just got harder. It's much harder to eat healthier. It's much harder to get ingredients to make healthier food when you're on food stamps or you're in any kind of poverty. I'm sure there are ladies that are part of my viewership that know exactly what I'm talking about. And we were on public aid when I was a kid for a very long time. My mother did the best she could, but you know, between well, health issues and a few other things, it was very, very hard for us overall. So we were on aid for a long time, and then I was on aid when I was in school, and I got briefly off aid when I got married, and then I was back on aid after I got divorced. So during those times of being on aid, it's food. Now, back then, food was cheaper. I'll give you that. But I was still getting maybe $200 for 4 people for the month. And those food stamps don't cover things like toilet paper and all that other stuff. So we're talking just food. And I can tell you, even back then, healthy food cost a great deal more than that. So we were getting, some things were good. We were getting milk. We were getting, frozen vegetables. I think even back then I was aware canned vegetables were just not the best way to go. For a lot of them, though, for me, it was flavor. There was just something always off about the flavor of canned vegetables, and I just didn't like them. So I usually bought frozen, and since then, that's all I buy, with a couple exceptions, like hominy. You can't get hominy frozen. You have to get that in the can. And then there are things that I absolutely, for whatever reason, cream corn, you got to get in a can. Although now I could probably make my own. So, and there are a few things that I absolutely will not buy in can. It's hard enough for me to eat peas. I will not buy them in canned. I won't get canned peas. They have to be frozen. And one of the reasons is the flavor. At least back then it was the flavor. Now it's also health related. Canned food actually has less nutrition than others. So anyway, yeah. I just realized I might need a blue, and I don't have a blue in any of these. I may be pulling in something else, guys. We'll have to see. So when I was a kid, there was a period of time I was eating health food, and I don't recall complaining about most of it, but yeah, back then health food wasn't necessarily the most flavorful thing in the box. And I think that really influenced my eating later in life. And obviously being on food stamps and other kinds of public aid also influenced the way I ate because of affordability, as in most good food was not affordable. So for a long time, my diet was, well, to put it not too gently, shit. And some of that is choice. I mean, I'm a kid. I was a kid. And I liked sweets. I still like sweets. I like junk food. I like potato chips. I like popcorn. I liked those things. That's a kid thing. So, and those things definitely tasted better than health food. And for the most part, for most of those things, tasted better than the food I could afford on food stamps. Because, I'm sorry, that macaroni and cheese with the powder, ew, that stuff is nasty. I'm going to put FOMO, which is this one, on the inner corner of my eye, and Pretty AF on the outer corner. So we're going to go from a bronzy golden orange to a purple. We'll see how this works out. I was still eating, we were still doing okay. I did go through a period of time when I wasn't eating much at all. I would leave the house at, god awful early in the morning to get to school. And then I wouldn't eat all day until I got back until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So that also really didn't help much. But I couldn't afford the food in addition to transportation at the time, and I needed to get through school. And then I married my current husband, and at the time he wasn't a chef, and he was struggling to provide for us, and I was doing what I needed to do to take care of my son. And we were eating a little better, but it was still all convenience, prepackaged food. The biggest part of the problem, I think, at that time, in fact, I know it was at that time, was how much of it. And I have since learned, since I've thought about it, because I have been on Lose It for quite a few years now, and you know, you log your food and you get a good idea of how much the calories are of a plate of food after a while. And let me tell you something. Nowadays at dinner, I can eat between 500 and 1,000 calories, depending on the type of meal we're talking about. And considering the size of those plates, I had to be eating between 1,500 and 3,000 calories back then on one plate of food. That's my entire caloric needs on one plate of food. And that didn't count, you know, the lunch and the breakfast and everything else. So I was seriously overeating, and it's no surprise I ballooned as big as I did. But in all honesty, I didn't think about it at then. At least not until much later, and I was finally starting to have trouble getting around and having trouble doing things, and I was gaining weight, and I was like, okay, something's got to go. And I started working on food. And one of the first things we started to do, we didn't actually work on the quality of food initially. We worked on the amount of food. We started cutting back, and we started cutting back gradually. I mean, we didn't look at our plate and just suddenly go, okay, let's only eat half of that. Using the same brush, which I've cleaned off, I'm going to go into Pretty AF to do the outer part of my eye. That took some time, but basically we started cutting back on the amount of food we put on our plates. Kind of was necessary, because man, that's a lot of food in one plate. And then we moved, because we didn't really do much other than start cutting back on the amount of food when we were out there. I really love Violet Voss. I gotta tell you guys, it's beautiful, beautiful colors. I'm gonna have to put something across the middle to meld these colors better, but it can be pretty. And it wasn't until I reached that point where I couldn't move and I was bedridden and all that stuff that I finally started really working on food again. We did cut back, but I will say we didn't cut back enough yet. I swear, I think about the plates of food that I used to have, and I'm like, holy shit. Really? Why were you eating that much? And I still to this day can't tell you why I was eating that much, other than it was there, I guess. And I'm, you know, because we are a family that's been on food stamps and all of that stuff, I've been in and out of poverty all my life. One of the things you don't waste in my house is food. I've still got that to this day. The food will get saved and it will get eaten. It will be tomorrow's lunch. It will be whatever it needs to be. It will get eaten. We try not to throw out any food unless it is absolutely terrible food. I mean, it's burnt or it's gone bad or, you know, something of that nature. Okay, so we're going to take this light color Escape and put that across, brush that across the middle of my lid and have that lighten up the thing. Meld these two colors a little bit. Yeah, that's working a little bit. As a kid, I loved fruit. Yes, I love sweets, but I loved fruit. And I'm not a fan of vegetables, but I think that's a kid thing. But I loved fruit, and I don't know what happened to it as an adult. I've become very fussy about fruit. As a kid, I would eat almost anything that was fruit. And nowadays, I'm not big on bananas. I like apples, but only certain apples. I love grapes. I love cherries. So there are certain fruits that I adore, and there are other ones that I'm not so pleased with. I don't know what happened, honestly. The only thing I can think of is because when you're on food stamps long enough, gets harder to get fruit because fruit is one of those things that's expensive. And then, I don't know, I just lost the taste for it, which is just sad that we can't make sure that poor families get healthy food, you know. I think that the better thing to do with like the food stamp program is to have so much set aside for fruit, so much set aside for fresh or frozen vegetables, and then let them spend the rest of it the way they want. I have no issue with someone on food stamps going to get a birthday cake or whatever. I am not one of those people. Having been there and knowing that you deserve some luxuries. I mean, life is pretty miserable when you're poor. So I'm not one of those people who wants to make it more miserable. But we make it so hard for them to afford fresh fruits and vegetables. And I think that they should get their base, whatever it was. Like I was getting 200 for 4 people, get that 200, and then maybe another 100 on top of that that can go to fresh fruits or frozen fruits and vegetables, just to make sure some of that food that they eat is healthy. Going to take this color aesthetic, this reddish color, I'm going to put that in my crease and on the outer corner. So when we got here and I started working on losing weight and all of that stuff, that's when we finally started changing how we ate. And some of that too came along because of my husband finally going into his culinary program. And of course he had to cook for them, and we had to start rethinking how we were eating anyway, just so that he could practice his cooking. And we were still in a state of not having a lot of money for food. It was still very hard, but he was able to start that changes with flavors because of his cooking. And because I went on this thing, we started changing other stuff too. So one of the first things I think we changed was going from white rice to brown. And that was not that hard for most of us. Brown rice is a little harder to cook, which was a bit of a pain in the ass, but you know, hey. And then we started adding other grains. Like I like barley. Most of the rest of my family doesn't, but I like barley. We've started adding things like quinoa. It's how I used to pronounce it. Quinoa and millet and just a bunch of different kinds of grains. We eventually started looking for whole grain or whole wheat spaghetti. I put my son on whole wheat bread. We weren't doing a lot of bread then, but anyway, he needs bread for his snack sandwiches. And we started doing more home cooking. I started doing more home baking. We started getting less convenience foods. We found a farmer's market that was cheap on the vegetables. The regular grocery store would be much more expensive, but we were able to start affording vegetables, and those started coming in. So it was gradual changes over time. I mean, it's been 10 years. So yeah, we would change one thing, get used to it, change something else, get used to it, change something else, get used to it. And plus my husband was doing his cooking, which we still really support. And I'm going to try to find a blue. So hold on a minute. I want a blue in my crease. We're going to try this Midnight Chaos one. It's a matte. I'm going to try this one. So that was the positive part of my journey with food. And then, as I told you a few years back, we started having issues. Essentially, we had our grandson here. We've had a lot of other things going on, and it became much harder to. Yeah, that's not very blue, guys. It's not very. Guess it works. Hoping for something a little brighter, but it's blue. It's just not. It's just not as out popping as I hoped it would be. It works though. So our food started to change again, but mostly because of time. My husband was working 2 jobs, and I had a grandbaby that I was chasing down all the time. And other things were going on, and we started to rely on convenience foods again. So it's no wonder I started regaining weight. I mean, you know, I got menopause going on. I'm not exercising as much, and now I'm eating convenience foods again, which are high in fat and sodium and all that other stuff that you actually really don't want in your diet. Well, I shouldn't say don't want, that you want to limit in your diet. I'm going to take some of this, hold on, some of this sparkly purple and put that across the bottom. This darker one. Might throw the lighter one over it at some point, but we're going to start with the darker one. See how that works. Oh wow, that's dark. Guess I should have expected that, huh? Does look nice over the blue though. So we went back to convenience foods, and easy to cook, easy to deal with, easy to, you know, throw out. I mean, not that I'm still in that don't waste food kind of state. I'm going to put that lighter purple on the inside. I may end up going back to my Violet Voss in a minute, because NYX can't stand up to Violet Voss. NYX is a good brand. Well, that actually came out kind of pretty. But it's not Violet Voss. These colors are a lot darker than I expected them to be. We're going to call the eyes done. It just was easier to manage the chaos of how life was going at the time, without also having to try to manage our food, and at least not the way we had before. Our finances had gotten tighter again, and so some of that food was harder to afford. Barley, wild rice, brown rice, bulgur, millet, quinoa, those things are all really healthy foods, but they are also more expensive. I can get a thing of white rice that'll last us, you know, 2 or 3 meals, and I can get it for $1.50. But if I want quinoa, for example, the cheapest they have at our Kroger, in the Kroger brand, is somewhere around $6 or $7. So it's a big difference, and that makes it harder. However, that all said, we are now gradually trying to work back towards the healthier foods. Things have calmed down in the house. We can start focusing on that again. And so that is something that we want to do, is get back to healthier eating. I'm trying to get back to my exercise again, and healthier eating needs to go hand in hand with that. We are working on getting back to that. We are not there yet. Again, some of that is the expense, because I want to get back to brown rice, but brown rice is more expensive, and our budget is still really, really tight. So we still go to the farmer's market. We still manage to get fresh fruits and vegetables to put into our food. We are still starting to go more back into home cooking rather than convenience foods. The grains is actually the hardest part. And those are cheaper than meats, which is kind of scary. I mean, really, think about it. $7 for a bag of quinoa that'll last me 2 or 3 meals versus $15 for a family pack of pork chops that'll last me 2 or 3 meals. It's a big difference, but it's still much more expensive than, say, white rice. Okay, so I think the eyes are done. I'm not sure how I feel about them yet. I'm going to put on the rest of my face, and we will finish this little bitty discussion, try to wrap it up, and we'll see in just a minute. So here's our completed look. I I think I'm okay with the eye look. It's a little darker than what I would normally do. The shades in this tend to be very, very dark comparatively. I am having some issues with my eyes, and my Violet Voss is actually not standing up to it today. Usually they do. I did put in a little bit of color from, I have to find it, I put it away, from my NYX Strobe of Genius. I did try to use the bright pink in the Protege palette. Unfortunately, it didn't show up, so I ended up going to the NYX Strobe of Genius. This is one of my favorite highlighter palettes, and I use it a lot, so really, really enjoy this. Anyway, so to finish up on food, changes, like I said before, were gradual. We have long been believers of eating a balanced and healthy diet. We do not believe in taking something out of your diet unless it's something you can't have, like a diabetic should reduce their sugar. Celiacs, I think that's how you call it. They're gluten sensitive, so they should reduce the gluten or get rid of the gluten. That's one thing, but without something like that, we are firm believers in eating from all the food groups in a healthy, balanced moderation. If we could, we would go to, say, the Mediterranean diet mixed with the Asian diet, but those are fish heavy and financially that's not possible. So we kind of use a little bit of that mixed in with the Latin and what's called the old healthy weight pyramid. But most of the changes, before we started doing all that, most of those changes took a lot of time. We had to learn to cut back on food. We had to learn to change out food, and our tastes have changed. We have found that, yes, occasionally we really crave a fast food hamburger, but we have to be willing to pay for it too. When you start eating healthier, your body will start reacting to food that's not as healthy differently. We have had started experiencing issues when we have those other kinds of foods now. So yeah, you make those changes a little bit at a time. We made those changes a little bit at a time, and these little gradual things, and eventually you are on a healthy diet. Yes, it is easy to fall off. Obviously, if your life is stressed, diet is the last thing you want to be worried about. And eating the convenience foods, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do, right? I mean, it's just, you got to do what's works for you and your current circumstances. But we will talk more about what constitutes a healthy diet, at least in my opinion, and I will repeat, it's an opinion. It is based on a lot of research and using scientific sites to verify things. Because as I've mentioned before, the diet industry is an industry, and even a lot of the diets like the paleo diet or the Atkins diet, even if they started off as something to be healthier for a particular group of people, in the end, they're out there to make money, and you've got to watch it with that. The changes you make in your diet have to be changes that you either can live with, meaning that you can keep them consistently even after you're off the so-called diet phase, or are changes that you can easily go back to when you've had a disruption in your life like we have, and you've had to go back to convenience foods or whatever you've had to do to get through that period of time where focusing on what you're eating is not necessarily the thing that you have the time for. You don't have the brain space for it. One of the ways that you can cut back is to, when you dish up, go back on your plate before you take a bite and take off a scoop. One little scoop off of the rice, one little scoop off of whatever. Those things it'll be a gradual thing. You will not be as hungry. The weight won't come off as fast because you're not making an immediate drastic cut, but you will be reducing your portions to something more reasonable. And the other thing is to learn what a portion size is. For example, did you know that a portion of meat is the size of a cell phone? 3 ounces. That is a single serving of meat. The portions are a lot smaller than what you realize. And that's going to be a big part of what you're going to need to work on is portion sizes, at least initially. That's what we had to work on, was portion sizes. And later it becomes easier to change things out as you're working on changing the types of foods. But don't take on, like everything else that I've talked about, don't take on too much at once. Figure out something you want to work out. That too. Figure out something you want to work on. Say, I want to get off of white bread. I want to start eating wheat bread. Make that something that you work on until you're comfortable with it, and then move on to another thing. If you can do 2 or 3 things at once, that's great too. You know, like for us, it was get off the white. We just said the white entirely. So we wanted to switch out white rice for brown, white bread for wheat, and things like that. We wanted to get to whole grain. So we said switch out the white, and that was easier for us to deal with at that time. But not everybody's going to be able to make those changes all at once. So do what's comfortable for you in that way when you're making changes on your diet. Start with what's easiest. Start with what's most important. Portion sizes, reducing the amount of sugar. I'm not saying cut out sugar. I'm saying reducing the amount of sugars, reducing the amount of fat. Those things are kind of important. The rest will come as you make those changes and get used to them. Anyway, so that is it for today. And I hope you've liked what you've seen and what we've discussed. And if you're not subscribed, I hope you will subscribe. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when I upload. I upload Sunday and Monday, Wednesday and Friday of every week. Trying for anyway. And if you are already part of my notification squad, please check your bell, because yes indeed, we are still being knocked off. Come on, YouTube, it's been months. Fix it. Anyway, and if you do not subscribe, well, that would make me very sad, but you are welcome to join us again. And when you do join us again, don't forget to bring your cup of tea. This sucker is cold now, so we're going to see how this tea tastes cold. I can live with that. It's still got that light minty. I think there's almost a citrus in there too. Like I said, I do not have the ingredients, so I'm just guessing. But it's got a very light flavor. I like it even cold. You all know me. I love a good tea that can be hot or cold. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day.